Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Fleischer. I'm the Executive Director of the Nonprofit Resource Hub. Thank you for coming on to our webinar today. For those of you who are not members, the Nonprofit Resource Hub is a resource to the nonprofit community, help them grow and thrive. We connect them with our associate members and really work with everyone to help the sector as a whole. Kellyanne just put the link in the chat. If you're not a member, please sign up. It is free, and we hope that you do and become part of our community. So today's webinar is the influence and impact navigating legislative relationships for nonprofits. We've been getting a lot of feedback, and a lot of our nonprofit members have been asking for more information on this. So we welcome McBride Consulting Business Development Group here to share their knowledge and insight with you. They will tell you a little bit about McBride more, but they work in business strategy and consulting, lobbying and advocacy, business development, RFP and grant writing, MWBE certifications, and public relations and communications, and they will go into that a little bit more. Today we have Greg Levine. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs at McBride. He brings over 20 years experience in government relations, public affairs, communications, and policy strategy. We also have Kimberly Kay. So she began her career in journalism, writing about New York arts and culture by day, and disability advocacy at night. She specializes in project planning, funding, strategy, helping nonprofits of all sizes navigate grants, and helping with that, and trying to unburden the internal staff. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will be answering questions at the end of the webinar, and I'm going to throw it over to Greg and Kim.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you to Kellyanne Serini, the Nonprofit Resource Hub. We are honored to be a member of the Resource Hub. It is a fantastic organization helping to connect nonprofits through Long Island, throughout New York, in many different spaces, and we've been really pleased to be able to attend events and webinars like this. So obviously today we're focused here on legislative relationships as well as grants and grant strategy ideas. As Amy mentioned, just to take it back a little bit, McBride Consulting is a government affairs and business development firm. We are based here on Long Island. We have offices in Manhattan as well as Albany, and we work throughout the country with partner firms and consultants similar to ours. And we really do four key things. And those four key things are government relations and lobbying. And I will go into the big picture of government relations and how lobbying is a piece of government relations. We do grant work, grant writing, grant research, fundraising assistance. We do registration for minority women businesses as well as business-to-business development and relationship building. And then we also do communications work. Sometimes those things can all go together. Sometimes they're within an individual space. So briefly, the firm is founded and run by Robert McBride. Robert is a longtime government relations leader, New York State, Long Island, and nationally, as well as a business person coming from the transportation space, where he ran and founded many leading transportation companies, as well as national and international associations, and running those. So again, we bring both the business development end as well as the government relations end, which is not an often common blend, but is a really nice blend because it helps us think big picture for our clients on many different levels, especially including our nonprofit clients. So as I mentioned here, nearly 40 years of trusted partnerships, focused on honesty, integrity, partnerships, communications, and dedications. I mentioned some of the general areas that we work in, and one of the key areas that we work with are nonprofits. We, both from our business experience as well as individually with our members of McBride Consulting, in our own personal space and personal lives, are very involved in nonprofit organizations, whether sitting on different boards, involved with different fundraising activities. So it is both from our work as well as our personal belief and drive in helping nonprofit organizations succeed here on Long Island, and throughout the state and the country. Some of the other areas that we work in are construction and infrastructure, healthcare, real estate, workforce housing, energy and renewable energy. Obviously, we've said nonprofits, education, and information technology. One of the things we do find is that any of the spaces that we work in the nonprofit sector plays a key role in all of the spaces, whether it be partnering with for-profit industries or, in the case of workforce development and affordable housing, hand in hand in helping to run key programs. So, couple lists of some sample clients that we work with here. You can take a look at, obviously, Cradle, Catholic Health, Habitat, Scott Beagle Fund, Concern Connection, Mulaway, CP-NASA, and DDI, amongst many others. Some of the leading organizations. And again, we work on all four levels of what I had mentioned in terms of our services for different organizations. So to get into a bit of the discussion here of where we wanted to focus and be helpful to the nonprofit organizations, both in some of our experience and then taking your questions, are really to look at, and I'm going to speak here on government relations and government affairs, and then Kimberly Kay is going to speak on the grants end and the funding end. So on government affairs, when we think about lobbying and government relations, people often either conflate them or are unclear of what they are. I think, just to be really clear, look at it from 50,000-foot perspective, the best thing to think about is that government affairs is the big umbrella, right? Government relations, government affairs, that's the big word, the big umbrella. Under those areas and under those government affairs banner are different spokes. One of the spokes is lobbying. Lobbying can be a couple things, but it can be direct related to legislation, and I'm sure everybody here has been involved in a legislative matter, whether it be at Albany or the local level, in influencing legislation to better the mission of the nonprofit and better the mission for constituents. So there's a lobbying piece of that. There's also a part of lobbying that may not necessarily be for legislation, but it may be more related to general influence, trying to reach out to our elected legislators, whether they be new, be there for a long time, and influence and build those relationships to them. We're still communicating with them, so it's considered lobbying, but we need to look at it as not specific just to one issue. It's long-term relationships and how we do that. One example, and I know everybody's done this, in the Nonprofit Resource Hub did an excellent job at their first one this year. Just as an example, are legislative gatherings. So a legislative breakfast, a legislative meet and greet, where we're bringing together the key elected officials based on the issue, as well as based on the issue at hand for the nonprofit, as well as for the general community, and building those relationships. There may not be an immediate piece of legislation at hand, but it lets the elected officials really understand the core mission of the organization, as well as how it affects their constituents. So government relations, government affairs, lobbying is one piece of it, whether that be direct lobbying or more indirect lobbying. The other part of government relations that we look at that's really key is understanding how to communicate to elected officials and to staff. So it's not so much communications from a PR end as publicizing out to the media, but in terms of what will grab the attention of the elected official and the staff member. As you know, very well working with different government offices. There's only a certain amount of time and a certain amount of attention that you're going to get on the matter just because of how much incoming they have. I always think of it in terms of what will my one pager say that is going to jump out at the staff member or the elected official that is going to be the key 3 to 4 things that I want to communicate. Besides the mission of my organization, what are those 3 or 4 matters going to be? So oftentimes I like to think of those 3 or 4 matters from big to small. So mission of the organization, um, value to Long Island, breaking it down further, value to their constituents, utilizing an example of a constituent in their district that has been served by your organization. These are things that can connect directly to elected officials and leave them to remember XYZ organization. Oh yeah, they helped XYZ within my district, or this is the strength they're bringing to Long Island. And that is going to absolutely help with staying visible and in their realm when you're looking at funding. As we know, funding for nonprofits is as challenging as it's been since I remember, and Kimberly will go further into that. So really keeping your communications clean, tight, and to the point are key. The last part that I just wanted to mention before I turn it over to Kim is that knowing and understanding key points of elected officials and their staffs in terms of from a personal standpoint is really, really important. So every elected official will have a story. They'll have a connection to some issue at hand. A lot of those issues will fall within the work that you do. Understanding that, understanding who they are, understanding what makes them motivated is very, very key. Also understanding their staff point, the key points of staff that you are going to be communicating with is really, really, really crucial, whether that staff handles budget, whether that staff handles legislative matters. So just kind of keeping that on your organization will be very helpful. And the last point I'll make is just kind of going back to where I mentioned the communications. Once you have those pieces built into place, one of the great things that I have seen, and I'll give you a little bit of my background and why I've used this tool before and why it's so valuable, is that once you have those relationships and are doing the great work that you're already doing within those districts, you're able to then help that elected official communicate out that message on that key issue that's helping their constituents in the greater region within their newsletters or their e-newsletters. So that great picture of partnering with the elected official for maybe funding that they provided for you or work that you have done to better their constituents, keeping within those spaces is really, really critical, because that's going to both give you the coverage that you want, but also connect you further into the elected official and into the mission that they're doing. Just by way of background, and I speak on this from experience. I've been on the government affairs and lobbying and communications end for the last 10 or 11 years. Prior to that, I've worked in government. As you saw in my bio, was the in-district chief of staff to Grace Meng, a member of Congress. I was a chief of staff to a member of the New York City Council, and I've worked in state government, local government, and international government at different levels. So I have seen what works, what doesn't work. I've seen what works on my end, what doesn't work on my end. And as we move along, especially with communications and technology tools, there's always so many different aspects and different pieces to bring together. But I think that there's still a core part of what the nonprofits can do to best communicate to their elected officials and then move their message as well as their mission. Great. And I'll turn it over to Kim K from our end.
Hey, everybody. So I am the grants and fundraising strategy nerd at McBride. Also proud judge this year at the Imagine Awards, helping review some pretty incredible Long Island organizations. So I'm coming to this from the perspective of someone who is looking at grants contracts, grants project planning, but also as a grant reviewer and someone who's sort of has a broad understanding of the pain points for nonprofits right now. And one of the reasons that we're going to talk about some of this data is that one place that a government relations and lobbying professional can be useful is in advocating for, hey, the way some of this is done, the way contracts, the way applications, the way financial disbursements are handled at the government level are burdensome in profoundly measurable ways that impact the quality of life of constituents for hundreds of thousands of nonprofits nationwide, but certainly in New York. So these center statistics are just to sort of back up for those of you who are experiencing some pain points in the sector. This is from the 2025 Urban Institute. 41% of human service nonprofits saw late government payments, despite their contracts having very clear terms. 57% saw disruptive changes like contract cancellations or reduced payments. 27% just saw general funding delays. Greg and I have certainly seen a fair amount of that over the last 18 months of, beautiful awards to beautiful organizations that then are not dispersed in the amount of time that's necessary to meet the deadlines, and then how that impacts not just the program participants, but the staff of the organizations who then have to sort of scramble. These are the sort of numbers that can be boring in a presentation and probably boring in a board meeting, but might be useful when you are talking to a government relationships pro or to your legislators about, hey guys, this is the scope of the problem. This isn't a small number of us being impacted by delays, labyrinthian approaches to applications and disbursements. Like, these are major problems. More than half of us are experiencing disruptive changes to service. And so we're going to get into a study in just a couple of minutes that sort of explains, hey, as far as tactics for how to deal with some of this, what can we do? Just to sort of hammer down that these pain points are real and your feelings about them are definitely valid, is that there are structural weaknesses in the way everything is set up, grants and funding wise, that make contracts very beneficial for the government, but not necessarily helpful or actionable for the nonprofits that are on the receiving end of the funding. Most common examples are going to be your sort of toothless legislation. We do have laws that say, hey, you have to make timely payments within X date, but then no real accountability or consequences on the back end if that's not there. There's also, I'm sure some of you are familiar with, there's interest waivers that then, there was supposed to be accountability that will keep people on time with payments, and that was waived. The laws are also built for vendors, not specifically for nonprofits, and that's something that's important to continue to talk to legislators about. New York State's contract laws were absolutely designed for for-profit vendors, and so the nonprofits kind of get in this gray area that doesn't have a clear definition on either end about what to do and how to meet the mission and what is the best path forward for an organization when they're impacted by funding delays. New York State Bill S7001 is ostensibly a step forward, but because it's not been implemented, it's not battle tested, so we're not quite sure how it's going to perform and how it's going to benefit nonprofits directly, which is why proactive communication with your legislators in advance can be useful, and we're about to talk about why. If you could just bump to the next slide. So what do grants professionals and nonprofit folks do to try and mitigate some of this and make it a little bit more manageable? Step one is going to be reviewing contract terms before acceptance. This means program staff and leadership really scrutinizing those contracts before you ever apply, looking at payment timing, advanced provisions, your interest waivers, not just scope of funding or not just what your reporting requirements are going to be, and really asking, does this sound like the best fit for our organization? Do we have the internal capacity to meet some of these demands? And marking up, are there areas where we might be able to negotiate with the funder to adjust the contract if we are awarded? Which brings us to requesting contracts with teeth, pushing for limits on interest waivers, discussing advance payment provisions. That's a really important thing to keep bringing up with legislators, is how vital advance payments are to continuity of services, and making sure that enforceable timelines are a thing. That it's not just, hey, we'll pay you within 90 days. It's here's what's going to happen if we don't pay you within 90 days. It can be difficult for smaller or medium-sized nonprofits to have those conversations if they don't have someone who's dedicated to, say, government relations or contract work. So that's where an outside consultant or a government relationships professional might be useful. And using your data strategically, always important in grant planning, always important in grant strategy, also really important when it comes to having conversations about protecting nonprofits from delays and systems that don't function optimally. Not simply saying, oh, hey, we didn't get $50,000 in funding, and so we couldn't send X kids to a nonprofit summer camp this summer. But being more specific and saying, as a result of that, 150 kids were not able to spend X amount of days in an educational environment. This impacts their mood by Y. Just really getting into a more data-driven narrative outside of here's how it affected our bottom line. Your planning for contingencies is going to be painfully important. Their National Council on Nonprofits has a little bit more information that expands on all of this, but their general recommendations are going to be, if you see that your funding is delayed or going to be delayed, requesting bridge funding proactively, bringing up or discussing revolving loans, and looking into lines of credit when delays persist. Getting out in front of that, having those discussions internally, talking to your board about it, talking to finance about it, talking to legal about it, and having those sort of contingency plans in place will really be an effective tactic. When you've already gotten to the point where the payment is delayed, now it's a chaos, now it's a scramble. If this stuff is sort of keyed up in advance, it can be more useful. The other theory is that when you're talking to legislators, saying, hey, if you guys are going to be amending contracts, or you're going to be discussing how the state's going to be writing these contracts, can you put in more language about this? Here's why it's important. Here's why it prevents delays of funding. Here's how it makes your constituents happier with your performance. Leading with data, reinforcing with narrative. We're going to talk in just a second about a sort of study that looked at this specifically. But so data-driven impact reports outperformed emotional appeals when it came to discussing actionable items with legislators and government agencies. So a common mistake, not really a mistake, but maybe a strategic error, is that people will lead with emotional appeals. These children weren't served. These patients weren't served. X damage was done. It's important, but the data-driven impact reports of how much that cost, how much it increased costs for the next year because services weren't delivered on time, how many acres of land were impacted, and how much that's going to cost down the line. Those things really moved legislators or agencies to act, whereas the emotional appeal alone didn't work. Putting the two together did. And then finally, the big thing, the big point of today's chat is engaging legislators before the crisis. So this study we're about to talk about found that reactive advocacy failed once the crisis had occurred. And I think Greg and I can expand on this a little bit in a minute if we need to. But if you're at the point where you were waiting for your payment to come through, or you were waiting for your support to come through, and then it didn't come, and it didn't come, and it didn't come, suddenly it's 3 months late, 6 months late. Once you're there, you're already kind of in a bad situation. And a legislator or a government office that should be helping with this might feel the exact same overwhelm and panic you do about it. Oh no, this problem's already here. The crisis is happening. When people were able to build very strong relationships to the point where they could reach out to their legislator or their contact in a government office and say, hey, Normally we receive this paperwork by now when we're going to get our payments on time, and it's 48 hours before and we still don't have it. Are we still going to get this payment on time? Is there any delays that you see? Do you need anything from us? That could sort of stop the snowball from turning into a large avalanche. And these sorts of reaching out and checking in, they're only possible if you've built the relationship well in advance of the crisis event. So moving over to this actual study, where is this information coming from? There was a University of Antwerp study that was published last year, 704 legislators and deep relationships with legislators that are very similar to those in the state of New York, where human services are deeply integrated with the work that the government does. Just sort of looked closely at, well, how do we put these proactive relationships together? What does that mean? How do we actually do this? Why does it work better? It was because the legislators felt so much more invested and so much better informed. When people are sort of speaking off the top of their head or speaking in generalities because they're not deeply informed, or they don't have an emotional connection or a data-driven connection to what's happening, they're less likely to speak on it. They're less likely to take action. And the study, the researchers found there were longer and longer delays because there were so many meetings about what do we do and how do we do it and should we say anything? And if we don't know what to say, well, just don't say anything at all until the next meeting. And suddenly the problem was persisting for 12 months to 18 months in the study results, rather than being handled proactively. And so the idea here is that, the when and why you would engage a lobbyist is because these steps are what was actually found to help nonprofits proactively build strong relationships that allowed them to get in front of that reactive response and more of a collaborative preventative response. So Greg, if you want to talk a little bit more about this, go for it.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Kim. And so generally, when nonprofits or profits or organizations engage a lobbyist, there's really two key times. And I like to say either the house is on fire and either you have not, in the case of nonprofits, received payment, which is the core, or there's something that is going to be crucially detrimental to the work that you're doing legislatively. That's the house is on fire. That's a cry for help, and we do work in that space. As the study shows, and as we have our own experience with, never the best place to start, but it is a place that we can work. Better place, and this goes again for nonprofits and general organizations, is either before that or as you're peering out maybe in your 5-year, 10-year plan of what your needs are going to be and how you're trying to line them up, whether that be on the funding end, from a local funding end, from a national funding end, from trying to obtain funding from non-government spaces in order to make sure that your budgets are whole. That especially within the funding and the grant space, but also, as I mentioned in the beginning, those relationships, and many of you have those relationships because I see the folks who are on here. I know many of you in your organizations, and we're at a lot of the same events. But the question is, are you fully organized in the way that you're communicating to your elected officials that really match what the study says? So it's blending the data and the personal story and connection to move the message. And that really can't be done when the house is on fire. So starting when either prior to the beginning of a legislative year, obviously in here, legislatures in from January to the end of June. If it's New York City Council, it goes year round. Each government kind of runs on a different schedule, but building the work that a lobbyist or grant specialist would do in with your organization, so they are a partner as opposed to simply just a vendor to you. And viewing what we do as a partnership will give a much longer term value to the organization. Some of the questions that have come up are we've looked at and happy to take more of them, or when to engage a lobbyist. We fully believe beforehand and objectively, not just because it's our business here, but objectively into securing your goal. And then other pieces that come into play, whether they be cost related, be workflow related, and we can definitely talk about that as some of the questions come up. But I think that keeping an eye on the study that Kim discussed and was focused on, and matching how the work you're doing matches into that will be very valuable. So if there are questions here for us today, we're happy to take some. I know there were some in advance and try to answer them within the webinar. But we really thank you for your time, your interest. And again, we're really excited to be members of this organization and just to try to be helpful to these great groups that are here and that are members, which are powering what we do on Long Island, whether the public sees it or not. The elected officials know, and we know. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg and Kim. We really appreciate it. Some great information. We do have a couple of questions, and I have a couple of things to bring up. So I'm going to ask the questions that are in the chat and Q&A. Brian says, generally, can elected official offices help with legislative awards once they are in process with the funding agency, OCFS, for example, and become stuck in the contracting phase?
Greg, I'm happy to take that. The answer is incredibly unsatisfying for a webinar, which is it really depends on the contract and it really depends on the people working in that office. Generally, yes. And I think, Greg, you might be able to share a little bit about this. We have direct experience with this exact scenario. Sometimes it is about somebody having a personal relationship and being able to make a phone call to a direct phone number rather than a general line or an info at office and say, look, this is the specific problem we're having. This is why we're having it. And again, getting back to the data, this is the problem that it's causing, and this is how much it's going to cost to you and your office, specifically in interest, but certainly in impact. Again, if certain healthcare services aren't rendered at X time, then by next year, we could see the cost of this increase by Y%. That can be a really powerful phone call to make to an office, but you have to have somebody who can make that phone call. And then Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, the phone call has to go to somebody who is reasonable and thoughtful and immediate in their action. And sometimes you're going to get that, and sometimes you're not going to get that. But does that sound accurate to you?
Yeah, I think that so the overall answer is yes. A legislator, as Kim said, a legislator can be of key value to the pushing along the process. Knowing the legislator, knowing, as I mentioned, the staff member is key. Here's another piece of it, and this is some of the work that we do, is that there are other levers to pull in trying to move that money along. And sometimes it's slow and sometimes it's messy. But there's other levers to pull, whether that be identifying strength at statewide elected officials and their staff and relationship, which is a piece that we do in terms of the fact that each agency comes under whether it's the governor, the mayor, the county executive, each agency is responsible to that, effectively to that elected official. And the other part is, and this goes into a lot of the work that we do, is understanding, besides that local elected official who may have either put in for the funding or is within your district, having the relationship between them and, let's say, a key person within the committee, that legislative committee that represents that issue. Those are all places where we work and can find success once in a while quickly, but generally a little more procedural.
Thank you, Greg and Kim. I hope that helped you, Brian. Our next question, and again, you may need to give a range. Ian's asking, what are the costs for engaging a lobbyist?
So let me start there. That's another one that varies. That another one that varies. There's in New York, when you're working with a lobbyist, and the lobbyist is communicating with government officials on any level, it is all public and reportable. There are no success fees. That is not legal in New York. You have to be on a some sort of retainer contract, whether that be a year, many years, or monthly, depending if it's a project-based matter. And then the lobbyist, in partnership with the organization, handles the reporting. In our case here at McBride, we have an in-house compliance officer who handles contracts as well as all of the relationships to the lobbying organizations. And there's one at the state level, and there's one at the New York City level, and there's different time periods when you have to file. That person handles that, communicates, walks each client that we have, especially in the nonprofit space, through registration as well as information that's needed. So the costs really vary. Lobby firms obviously understand, depending on the budgets that the nonprofit organizations have and what they're trying to accomplish, uh, that can determine how those spaces look. Um, Sometimes that differs from lobbying to the way we work on grants and grant work. But as rule of thumb, that's the government relations and lobbying space. There's not one specific answer. If there are questions more specific related to costs, happy to discuss. But I do want to emphasize that everything that we do and lobby shops are required to do here in New York, generally around the country, but specifically in New York, are all public and reportable, and the actions that we take to elected officials are as well, and that's really important for transparency.
And just a really quick note is that obviously there's, when you're a smaller nonprofit or even a medium-sized nonprofit, this isn't naturally built into the budget of those types of organizations. So from a funding strategy viewpoint, that might be an area. If you have an issue that really affects your entire sector, say your healthcare or your children's services, this is where your community partnerships with other nonprofits can be so valuable, sort of getting a coalition of groups that have a shared goal and a shared problem together and saying, we're going to engage an individual professional to represent us and our group with this particular issue, can sort of divide the cost or the burden between multiple organizations rather than one being tasked with it solely.
So Kim, I'm going to interject there because Elizabeth had that question.
Mhm.
How do you answer the question when to engage a lobbyist when it's an issue based, not necessarily funding based? She's talking about childcare in Nassau County. So when there is an issue, get together with other nonprofits in the sector, but we don't want to do when the house is on fire, right? Like Greg says.
Yeah.
But what if you're in the middle of an issue, right? And
Mhm.
and it just seems to escalate. How can you get ahead of it? Like at what point? And I think Elizabeth, this may help because get together with other nonprofits in your particular sector. But when do you engage? When do you look to say, okay, we need a lobbyist? This issue is getting out of hand. To me, it seems like the house is on fire. How do you get ahead of that?
Sure. It's how do you get ahead of a fire when you're noticing a flame and it's not huge immediately, but when you start the conversation, it's just like, oh, it's just a little match, we're fine. And then all of a sudden you wake up 2 weeks later and you're like, oh no, it's a crisis now. There's not a simple answer for that from, a sector perspective or from a funding strategy point of view. My general rule that I talk to people about is that if it's making you anxious, if it's something that you as a professional are sitting awake with at night more than once, it might actually be time to start having those conversations. Once something keeps me awake 3 times in a row, I go, it might not be big yet, but it is persistent. And so I think it's not always about the size, but it's about the persistence. Like this irritant is still here. This irritant is still here. It's been 6 months, and even though it's not a crisis yet, it's still an irritant. Reaching out to your peers in the group that you work in, childcare or child services, just being the example we were given, and sort of saying, are you guys seeing this also? Are you experiencing this also? Do you have any data that you have? Here's what we're seeing internally. Are you guys tracking how this is impacting you? And if they say, yeah, well, now you've got two people. It's the beginning of a coalition or a team. And you might together be able to cobble together impact data. And it might not be, well, we need to hire a professional to go to the governor with this right now. It can be as simple as let's start with, a project base and let's go to the mayor or let's go to, the town council. Whatever the smaller entity is, that would be the first step. That might be it. Noticing an irritant, noticing the persistence of the irritant, validating between your partners or your peers in the group that other people are seeing this also, and then taking your first smaller step rather than immediately, trying to scale the mountain. Greg, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I would add, and I mentioned it briefly before, I would add, and a lot of you already do this and know this, is really knowing and understanding the legislative calendar of each government that you're working with. So as an example, maybe not the best example right now, but as an example, on the state, we know that New York State, the legislature is in session from early January until June 30th, generally by law an April 1st deadline for budget. Obviously, we've seen the budget extenders and hopefully getting closer to that than not. But understanding the start time, the stop time of the legislative calendar, as well as when their budgets have to be done. In Nassau, it's for example, in the fall. New York City Council runs, maybe less related here, but New York City Council runs year round. When are those budgets? When are their committees? And when kind of goes to the question of when to engage a lobbyist, especially if you're trying to get ahead of an issue. Generally, for example, if a potential client would come to us over the summer and say, we're going to have this issue coming up, an XYZ of legislative or budget related, and it's dealing something with the state. Better to not start working with us in February because the budget process has already started. You want to get a jump on that. You want to be able to meet the success stories that I've seen are where maybe you're starting to work with that lobby firm or grant folks in the fall, and then you're getting meetings already with those legislators when they're out of session. They're in the district. You're building those relationships, and then you can tie that issue in with any association or organization that you're a part of. And it also helps with some leadership from that organization helping take the lead within the issue. So a lot of it is calendar based. One of the things that we do as a rule of thumb with our clients is that we always have it written and it's sort of like it's like the flip side of the one pager, right? It's like this is the part you're communicating to the elected officials, and your internal part of your one pager is, oh yes, this is the date, this is the process. And the more that you're focused on that and get that down, it's just sort of the building blocks of it. I've seen success with organizations that are very focused in that space.
Great, thank you. I hope that helps, Elizabeth. I have some questions. So, we're talking about building relationships with legislators, and you talked a little bit about some of those tools, Greg. I wanted to throw out a couple of more and have you kind of talk about it. One, you talked a little bit about a legislative breakfast. Let's talk a little bit more about what that looks like and why do it. There's a couple of different parts of this. Also, inviting the legislators to your organization to see a tour, to see, hands-on what impact you are making. That I am a development director. That has helped us a great deal. And then Kim or both of you, after we talk about relationship building a little bit, appropriations funding and working with the legislatives on that. So Greg, if you want to start a little bit on relationships and
Yeah.
and what does a legislative breakfast look like?
Sure. So, a couple tools in terms of engaging legislators outside of just one-to-one meetings, as well as phone calls, emails, and that kind of communication. Legislative breakfast is one good example of that. Generally, and there's a lot of them, so you try to do it when maybe there are other organizations not doing them, or you do it a little bit earlier in the season based on the legislative calendar, to get those issues in front of the elected officials. I would say for legislative breakfasts, if you have an organization that maybe is a large scale organization that is doing work, say across a county or Long Island, and it's pretty broad based. Those organizations, and there's some that just are standard. Everybody knows when it is. Everybody knows where the food is and what electeds are coming and the different topics. Or that organization has something of real interest to the elected officials, both from a viewpoint of what that stuff is in terms of promoting Long Island, as well as how it helps down the road, whether it's in education or in the arts. So I think sometimes I've seen the success on the legislative breakfast at for larger scale organizations. You're inviting elected officials that are not just within the district, but throughout the island. You're getting a bunch of folks there. You can do media around it as long as the elected officials agree to it. A lot of times we've seen success where an organization has a big announcement to make beforehand. So now you're getting the elected officials there for the announcement. So you're helping, again, you're partnering with them to promote them as well as what you're doing. And then you go into the legislative breakfast or vice versa after. I think for some of the organizations that may be mid-size or smaller, I think that you don't want to, for lack of, excuse my pun, bite off more than you can chew in that space. There are other tools that you can use that are similar to a legislative breakfast. It could be a smaller legislative panel where you're focused, say, instead of having 80, 100 people, you're focused on maybe your 5 legislators at different local levels or their reps, and having a conversation and a discussion, and you have 20 key members that are important to your organization, whether there's some of your board members, some community members. You can host that at smaller conference rooms and have fruit and coffee. It doesn't. So I think that the idea of a legislative breakfast can be very strong and very powerful and very important. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of planning, but there are other avenues that you can do. I've seen organizations, just by way of example, not here, but in another state that I work with, that had partnered with a local state senator, and twice a year they did coffee and bagels with state senator, that person, at the same place, and then people knew where it was. So there are smaller, more creative ways that you can do that as well. So it just, I think, depends on your size, depends on your budget, and depends on what you're looking to get out of the event.
Before we move on to appropriations, so some ways to build relationships: call and meet, bring your CEO in, go and make a meeting, go in, talk to them. Some nonprofits have an advocacy or legislative liaison or a government relation liaison. Sometimes it's a development director. So whoever it is, get your CEO, go in, get some meetings. Legislative breakfast, large, small, get together, let them hear your stories. Invite people from constituents from their area who are being impacted in a positive way of what you do, and how that impact would change if funding was not given or delayed. What about advocacy days? So I'm work for a federally qualified health center. We have community advocacy days. We also rally around the budget that's still going back and forth, and support all that as a community of health centers. So within whatever sector you are in the nonprofit sector, a lot do have advocacy days. I saw that Lauren said that she just came back from an advocacy day, and someone else that was on just is on a train home from meeting with legislators in Albany. Um, just looking at ways to connect. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I can just briefly start. So those can be very, very impactful and very powerful. The key to legislative days advocacy, which generally means that a group beyond just your organization with similar interests are going to a capital and rallying, meeting with legislators. The key thing there is the organization and communication through the association that you're working with, or if it's sort of an ad hoc group. Because the one thing you don't want to do, and I know this from being on the other end, you want to be able to reach as many elected officials or staff as you can, but you don't want to be overly repetitive about it, where that staff met on this issue just an hour ago, and then somebody else is coming and doing the same thing. Coordinate it, organize it together. There's a ton on their plate, and you want to get the most out of your message that you need to do. Um, you'll see oftentimes people color coordinate their outfits and their shirts or hats and things like that.
That's me.
That branding matters, right? I mean, you know, we see that. So that branding does matter, but the stronger the coordination, the better. Frankly, that's another place where we work in working with associations to organize that. It's somewhat similar to thinking about it as a legislative breakfast. You want to get the most out of it with the most direct mean of communication, without repeating your message in places where there could either be confusion or, frankly, those staff say, I know, I heard this already. I mean, it's good to get to that point, but do it in the right way.
Great. So we have about 5 minutes left. Building relationships help in both of the things we've talked about, right? Having a relationship with your legislator will help you if you do have an issue, whether it's a policy issue or whether it's a getting paid issue, from some money that you've already had. I am going through that. We are still working on 22, 23 grants that we've gotten that still aren't there. And it does affect the work that we all do. So building the relationships, really, to me, it seems like that's the core of all of this, right? Getting to know them, know who they are, know what their touch points are, what their favorite, what learn about them. Just don't go in and ask. I would think that you need to learn what their hot buttons are and what they do support currently, to see where you fit in with that, because you can go in on many different levels, right? It doesn't have to be, oh, I'm healthcare, so you think about healthcare. It could be, maternal. It could be all these little things within that these legislators like. So I really got out of this about building those relationships, because that will help. Again, I mentioned appropriations funding because I happen to have luck in that way, and they're easy applications. They're not hard. But if you're asking for something in this person's district that really means something to them, if the funding's there, you have a good chance if you have a relationship also. I have one example that we've invited them to see us. They've come to our ribbon cuttings. They've come to see what we do. And I've gotten great support this time around. Anything on, is it the same things? Just build that relationship and kind of like knowing the calendars, know when these things are coming up, get on their mailing lists. Make sure I got a phone call saying, hey, we're accepting applications. That's the greatest thing that you could get, because they're thinking of you too, and they want to get the right funding for their district. Anything to say on appropriations? And if not, we'll close this up if no one has any more questions.
Sure. You're correct. As a grant writer, comparing, say, like a federal grant application to an appropriations application, like absolutely, you're going to want to do that application instead. But thinking about it from a sort of grants and project planning and funding strategy place. Just like with grants, with appropriations or discretionary funding, you want to think about mission alignment and really do your research about the funder in this case, you know, the individual branch of government or the policymaker that you're reaching out to, and not just looking at them and their personal interests, but the not necessarily party, but the larger any coalitions or groups that they belong to, because sometimes an individual can be very passionate about something and vocal that this is a priority to them. But, you know, we've certainly seen this sort of like terminations of convenience happening at the federal level where there's policymakers who are very gung-ho about issues that affect constituents in their region, but they're not in alignment with the administration and the administration. So these awards go out, people are very excited, entire years or multi-years of programs are planned around them, and then the people above that person go, nope, this is not in alignment with what we want. So thinking about, am I mission aligned with the person that I'm going to reach out to or apply with? Am I mission aligned with the people above them? Do they have a history of terminations of convenience, or what is their rate? You know, doing your due diligence and really researching before you commit your staff or yourself, if you're that person, to we're going to fill out this application, we're going to do all of this work, we're going to compile all of this. Just being thoughtful and strategic about your approach and doing really good research first, to me is an area where that can help.
That's great. This was great. Like I said, I've learned a lot. I think that the foundation of this is get out there and talk to your legislators, get to know them. If you're not, you should be, on so many levels. And when there is, I'd like the information about, you know, if you're feeling anxious and you have that agita, other people in your sector and your group are probably having it too. So utilize those people, talk to them. You know, we're bigger in numbers, right? We're stronger in numbers. We thank you, Kim and Greg, for doing this. Thanks everyone that hopped on. We will be sending out the recording and the slides. If you have any other questions, Greg and Kim's information is in the chat, or you can reach out to Kellyanne or myself if you need any introductions or something. But we thank everybody for joining, and have a great rest of the week.